And the recording on. Okay, can you guys hear me now? Someone? Alessandra?
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. Okay. All right, people are trickling in. I'll wait a minute or two. Okay, so today we're coming down to the wire. I think Monday's the last class, if I recall. So we're almost done. I posted your exam in the Blackboard Blackboard course documents area. So it should be up and running. When you return it, please upload it to the assignment section. There's like a Dropbox thing there. You can just upload it. Please use a Word file, not a PDF. I can't write on PDF, so it makes it more difficult to grade. So please use a Word file. And it's due on the 17th, so you have a lot of time. Or let me, the air conditioner going, let me turn that off for a second. Do you have any questions? Anyone questions about the exam or anything? Nobody? Anybody? Okay, so if you do, let me know. Uh, and the way to do it, I think you should have been reading the book all along, but you should read the book and go through the book and you'll see the answers right in the book. Okay, I took the exam right out of the book for the most part. There's some questions about the films and some other stuff, but it's mostly right out of the book. Okay, so today I said we were going to talk about HR. Last time we were doing organizational change. And I think if I go back to that model from Tushman and O'Reilly, that there are some building blocks to any organization, and these include organizational structure, which we talked about. Let's call it structure. It includes the technology that the firm uses, and we didn't talk a lot about production methods. That's a subject for another class, but we did talk about the effects of technology on society and organizations. We've talked a little bit about that. There's also, which we talked about last time, the important issue of culture, organizational culture, and how the group beliefs influence the company. And finally, somehow and finally, there's what we're going to talk about today, human resource management, and how the firm is influenced by policies, industrial relations, and HR policies, and what those are. I'll give you a brief overview, which is really my field. I mean, that's closer to my field than the OB theory we've been talking about. And then the structure of the organization, I mean, the strategy of the organization influences how these are pursued. And they're all interactive, kind of. And if they match and fit together well, then performance is good. If they don't match and don't work together well, or they're not appropriate to the environment, then the performance isn't good. And lastly, I should say, and I left this out, I should have said this first, that the environment heavily influences both the structure and the strategy. So you can't think about what the appropriate strategy is without taking the environment into mind, and you can't take the or know what the appropriate structure is without taking into account the environment as well. So all of these variables, culture, technology, HRM, the building blocks, are influenced by the environment. You have to take the environment into account in designing them. And if the match is good among these different variables, then you have good performance. And today we've as I say, we've done structure, we've done culture, we've done technology, and that influences performance. So the way the course has gone is we started with individual behavior and we moved into group behavior. So in other words, we talked about personality and we talked about um, uh, how to understand the individual, and then we talked about teams and groups and a motivation and how people interact, and now we're talking about the structure, the broader structure of the companies, and that includes these building blocks and HRM in particular. So basically, HRM, can anyone tell me what it is? You can submit, it doesn't really matter, that I left that in from the days when I used to use paper, but Jonathan asked whether you need to submit the answer sheet or the whole thing. It doesn't really matter because I just look at the answer sheet. So it's electronic, so I don't really care what. When in the days when I used to use paper, it would get bulkier if they submitted everything. So I asked them just to rip off the answer sheet, but now it doesn't really matter. So you can just submit the file with the answers on the answer sheet. As long as the answer sheet is the first page, I don't really care. So basically, does anyone in the class know what human resource management is? Do you have any? You're welcome, Jonathan. Does anyone have a guess or an understanding of what HR is? I know some of you work in firms that have an HR department. What do they do exactly? Some people might say nothing, but that's not really true, although in some places it's debatable. Any thoughts about it? Nobody? Okay, very good, Winston. Those are two very specific. Winston wrote on the meeting chat, employee benefits, training and development, internal and external affairs. I would say not external affairs so much, Winston. It's almost entirely employee issues. So sometimes they might get involved in if there's some kind of external problem involving the employees, they might be asked to make a public statement, but usually okay, in processing and out processing employees. So you're basically anything dealing with employees, and that would include staffing, recruiting and selection as staffing, it's compensation, as Winston says, benefits, training and development, firing people, regulation, the regulation of all the HR stuff. And there's a lot. It's at this point in history a very heavily regulated field. It started out when I was, when I started out, it was, let's say when I was 5 years old, it was not that heavily regulated. There's always some regulation, but not that heavily regulated. And in my lifetime, it became extremely regulated. So pretty much every aspect of it has some regulation or other. Training and development, not much, but employee benefits a huge amount. Compensation is regulated, especially with regard to discrimination. Firing is regulated in a million ways. Selection and staffing, and this gets us back to the diversity part of the class, that a huge number of laws were passed because of the discrimination that went on against minority groups, but especially among African Americans. So one of the big turning points in HR was the result of the civil rights movement of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Sometimes I recommend to the class that you take a look at a really good movie with Denzel Washington and Forrest Whitaker called The Great Debaters. I forget who the director was. I'd have to look it up, but it's a truly excellent account of a semi-fictional account. It's not historical and it's not completely accurate, but it gives some of the broad facts and the rough outline of the early life of James Farmer, who founded the Congress of Racial Equality. And it takes place in the 1930s, in the late 1930s. And it shows the discrimination that faced the students in a historically Black college in, I think it's Texas. And they end up debating. In the movie, they fictionally say they debate Harvard, and I don't know why they did that. I guess it's more dramatic, but it was dramatic enough that they in reality they debated USC, University of Southern California, but which is a great university too, but not Harvard, of course. So basically, they it was a huge breakthrough against the discrimination that they were invited to a public debate that was aired on the radio between a Black college and USC. And basically one of the themes in that film was, I don't know whether it's true or not, it's probably just allegorical, but that the debate concerned Henry David Thoreau and his work, Civil Disobedience. And it was in that work that the idea of civil disobedience that was subsequently used by Martin Luther King and before him Gandhi in dealing with their, in the case of Gandhi, the colonial rulers, in the case of Martin Luther King, Jim Crow, and the Jim Crow laws. And basically, it came out of that philosophy of Henry David Thoreau. If you haven't read Civil Disobedience, I recommend it. It's a great libertarian piece of work. He's a true anarchist, you could call him. It's there that he says the government, I've heard it said that the government that is best governs least, but I say the government is best that governs not at all. And this idea of resisting by not paying your taxes comes from that book, which was broadened, and he talks about other ideas too related to it. So anyway, the civil rights movement was a highly brutal and controversial chapter in American history. And it came to a head in 1964 when Lyndon Johnson, who ironically turned out many years later, it was revealed when I think he had kept, there was some stipulation that it not be revealed for so many years after his death, but that it was subsequently revealed that he was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, the racist organization in the South, founded by the Democratic Party politician. What was his name? Was anyway. What was his name? It's not out of my mind. Here he is. Nathan Bedford Forrest. Nathan Bedford Forrest. I was thinking of Forrest Whitaker from the movie. I kept saying, wait, it's not Forrest. Nathan Bedford Forrest. And basically, Forrest had been a Civil War general, I think, or colonel, and extremely brutally killed a lot of blacks, completely unfairly, violated all the basic rules of war and stuff, and went on. And then later in life, he admitted he had made a mistake and it was wrong. But anyway, there was a huge battle in the 1950s about the discrimination, and a lot of it had been instituted not in the Civil War days, but in the progressive era by Woodrow Wilson and other progressives and this concept was recorded and first observed by in the book The Strange Career of Jim Crow by C. Van Woodward. So anyway, that's all background. And basically the Civil Rights Act of 64 contained a pivotal section 7, which section 7 says that you can't discriminate in the workplace. And this opened up a huge amount of diversity. When I was a kid, the want ads, the help wanted ads in the New York Times, they never mentioned race. That wasn't done in the North, although in the South, I think they probably did. In the North, though, they would say help wanted male and help wanted female, and there were two totally separate categories of jobs that you know, if you were a female, presumably you weren't allowed to even apply for the male job, and vice versa. And so that was ended by the Civil Rights Act, and that was, you know, that just like one little aspect of it. But it basically said that it set up a cause of action, so that meaning you could sue, so that if you were fired on the basis of 5 protected classes, and the classes are race, color, meaning the shading, like if you're a brunette or a blonde, if you're a darker skinned or lighter skinned color, race, color, national origin, what country you come from. Like, for instance, you can't discriminate against someone because they come from New Jersey, or you can't say, oh, I don't like people from France, I'm not going to hire them. That's not legal. And religion, you can't say I don't like people from a given religion, and that's become more salient in recent years. So basically, there are 5 areas covered by the Civil Rights Act, and these were added to over the years by many other important laws. How effective are they? It's very questionable. Okay, and there's a lot of room for debate. The addition of sex, incidentally, to the Civil Rights Act was so the 5 areas again: race, color, religion, national origin, and gender. And the addition of sex was actually an attempt by one of the Southern legislators, I think it was a congressman, but I'm not sure, to um, try to stop the passage because someone said, "Oh, no one would ever vote for equal rights for females," and they did anyway. So basically, that was added, and there had already been a law passed in 1963, the year before the Civil Rights Act was put through by Johnson, not by Kennedy, who wanted to push it through. But it's a case, it's another case that when we're talking about power and influence, that Johnson was just better at manipulating Congress than Kennedy was. He understood how to get a law passed better, and he got the law through. Kennedy was more idealistic, and I think we've got a better memory of him, although he's the one who really started the Vietnam War. Johnson escalated it, but we have a better memory of Kennedy. But it was Johnson who got the Civil Rights Act passed, and basically that it was a hugely transformative law, because before that, companies really, they were like the Japanese companies have been, and still are, I think, that they didn't value diversity that much. They valued homogeneity, that they all got along with each other, they all fit together. And you can see from what we were talking about with corporate culture, um, uh, in the book Men and Women of the Corporation by Rosabeth Moss Cantor, who was a Harvard professor, I think she was dean there for a while, that at the business school, that the level of trust is higher among people who are similar to each other. And it gets more difficult to trust people as they become more different. And so, in New York, you see this, that there are different ethnic communities to this day. In Brooklyn, there's, one neighborhood's Russian, one neighborhood's Asian, or et cetera, and Chinese, and so on. And basically, that's a natural thing. I mean, nobody questions that that's normal. But the thing is, what that does is it limits the inclination of the people who have the resources in the hiring process to hire other kinds of people. And so that bias results in exclusion of large sections of the population. Now, over time, America, has become more and more diverse, and I think part of the push for the Civil Rights Act wasn't just the injustices and the injustices that the African Americans had faced in that progressive era from say 1890 or so, a little later, to 1964. So it was like a 75-year period. That the injustices they faced were quite bad. And you could say it harkened back to the earlier injustices with slavery, but it was also a decision made by the progressive leadership, and Woodrow Wilson was certainly among them. He passed the Jim Crow laws in Washington. He's the one he was a Southerner, although he had been the president of Princeton. He pushed through the Jim Crow laws in Washington, which was technically not supposed to be a Southern city. It was supposed to be in between the two regions. But anyway, so basically, I think also the immigration that had occurred in the late 19th century into the 20th century until the 1920s, like a lot of that cohort had gained some economic stature and probably added to the pressure, because many of them were excluded as well. I can talk about some of these things quite a bit. Where I live upstate, I'm not there right now. I'm in the city at the moment, but where I live upstate, I live right next to the reservoir, and at that time, the reservoir, the New York City reservoir, it's called the Ashokan Reservoir. There's 16 of them, I think, or something like that, but it's the biggest one. And basically, when it was built, a lot of the construction workers were Italian. A lot of them knew stonework. There's a lot of stonework that they use there, and they had separate. They had segregated rooming. In other words, there were separate facilities for the Italian Americans from the WASPs, and they didn't want to share the facilities. So even at that level, there was discrimination. I'm talking about 100, a little over 100 years ago, like 110, 120 years ago. So basically, the Civil Rights Act transformed HR and made it into a more prominent issue. Um, there were other laws passed in the 1960s and 70s that led to or contributed to, along with the Civil Rights Act, a greater and greater focus on human resource management. And these included what the Equal Pay Act was passed before before the Civil Rights Act. And basically, the Equal Pay Act said that there should be equal pay for males and females um, um, when they do substantially similar work. It doesn't have to be identical work, but it should be substantially similar. So it doesn't say, for example, that if you pay truck drivers X dollars and you pay secretaries X minus $10, and the two jobs are equal according to your evaluation of the jobs, that you should pay the secretaries the same as the truck drivers. It doesn't say that. That would be called comparable worth. That's not covered by the Civil Rights Act. But what it does say is that if you have two truck drivers, one is male and one is female, they should be paid the same. Or if you have two truck drivers, one of whom has to drive a forklift for an hour a week and the other one doesn't, and the one is male and the other is female, you still have to pay them the same if driving the forklift is not an important part of the job. So if the jobs are substantially similar, you need to pay males and females the same, but not if the jobs are really different. So let's say one truck driver drives a forklift 22 hours a week, and it requires a great deal of forklift ability, and then drives a truck for the other 18 hours a week, and the other truck driver just drives a truck. In that case, the jobs would be substantially different. So you don't have to pay them the same. I think I'm clear about the difference. So basically, that was passed in 63. And then the Civil Rights Act in 64 broadened the issue of gender discrimination to all other areas, not just pay. But the Civil Rights Act said it defers to the Equal Pay Act. So the Equal Pay Act is still important because when it comes to pay differences in gender, the Equal Pay Act will govern. In the late 60s, you had an additional law called the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. And it was 1967. I had to look that up. I was thinking 68. And 67, the Age Discrimination and Employment Act said that you can't discriminate against employees because of age. And I think you'll agree that this really isn't realistic, that there's still a great deal of discrimination on account of age. Like if, I'm 68 rather, and let's say I went to apply for an entry-level job at an investment bank, would they hire me? I think the answer is no, and uh, they wouldn't hire me probably anyway if I was funny, but that's another story. But but basically, they'd look at the age and say, no, we're not, they wouldn't say it was age. They say, oh, you don't have the, you don't have enough potential, or we want to hire people for long term. So but if you look at how long their average employee stays there, it's a year and a half or 2 or 3 years, and it's really not that long term, but they say that. So they basically, though, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act said that you can't discriminate against about age with respect to hiring, but then at first they were allowed to, they were, when I started out in industry, everybody had a mandatory retirement age. I worked at this company, International Nickel, or Inco, which is now a subsidiary of Vale Corp, a Brazilian company. And they had a mandatory, like everybody else, they had a mandatory retirement age of 65. So everybody had to retire at 65. And I worked in the retirement area, so everybody. But then in the late 70s, they changed the ADEA so that you couldn't be forced to retire until age 70, and then they eliminated the retirement age altogether. And then they said there were a couple of exceptions, and then they said those exceptions don't apply either. So I think there's still an exception for certain security jobs, and I think they've done away. There was an exception for a long time for professors, and that was eliminated. Thus, I'm still with you. And there was also an exception for pilots, and I believe that was also eliminated, or there were exceptions made. So they've pretty much done away with the retirement age mandate, with retirement age mandates. Ironically, that was done at the very point where you started to see the technology, which we talked about, eliminating long-term employment. So in other words, the ADEA, I'd have to look up the year, but I think it was the late 70s, year ADA eliminated retirement age. Yeah, okay, 1978. I was right there. So it eliminated retirement at age 70 in 78, but then later, a few years later, it was totally ended altogether. And the result there, that was going on at the very time when the PC was being invented. And the PC, Bill Gates wrote the first operating system for a personal computer about 3 years before that. So basically, you saw the growth of technology at the very point where the retirement age was being eliminated. And it's probably just coincidental, but it certainly fits together that what the technology did was tend to eliminate the long-term employment for a large sector of the population. Professors are an exception, but that 10-to-1 that changes because of Chat GPT eventually. Not necessarily that, but it could be any artificial intelligence. And so you're going to see shorter term employment in professors too. And basically, as we've talked about, the technology makes employment relations much more flexible and shorter term. This could be, some people could say it's bad, some people could say it's good, whatever, good or bad, that's what it does. And so the result is that IBM, for example, which had lifetime employment, eliminated it in the early 90s. I think the year was 92 and right when I first started teaching. And I think part of the motivation, although I doubt any company consciously thought of it, is that once people can work forever, you're going to get stuck with people you don't want to be working there for longer than you expect. So I think if anything, that law may have contributed to shorter term employment. And as a general rule, regulation and legislation often has the exact reverse effect of what people think it's going to be. I can show you this with the minimum wage, which contributes to unemployment. And for a long time, the advocates of the minimum wage denied it and said, "Oh no, it doesn't." But then the research on it pretty clearly shows that it does. That economic theory predicts that the minimum wage does raise unemployment. Uh, the saving grace in America was that they always kept it low. As you push up the minimum wage, you make it higher. It motivates the retail people to invest in technology. So the basic principle is that if you push up, it's a law of supply and demand, that if you push up price, demand will decline. Demand has a declining slope. So if you push up demand, if you push up price, demand goes further back on the demand curve, and you employ fewer people. Supply might increase to some degree because you've raised wages, but it's probably not going to be enough to compensate. In America, we had a minimum wage. In Europe, it's much higher, and they have far worse perennial unemployment. Although now with COVID, that's changed. So basically, at the time that New York was raising the minimum wage, which was like 6 or 7 years ago, I think, I said, I think this is like a kind of rational expectations that they were doing a lot of inflationary stuff all through, well, to be fair, starting with Bush, but all through the Obama administration, and Trump exacerbated it. So this was before Trump, but I said, it's a kind of rational expectations that they're raising the minimum wage at the very point where they're expanding the money supply and doing a lot of stuff that's going to cause hyperinflation eventually. And indeed, that's what occurred. That, in other words, they raised the minimum wage to $17, but then the value of the dollar in the past 5 years has been reduced by like 30% or something. I haven't gone through the numbers, but it's, it was 6 or 7% last year, 5 or 6% this year. It was a few percent, in the earlier years. So, you're talking like maybe a 20% reduction in the purchasing power of the dollar over the last few years. And so the value of that minimum wage has been reduced significantly. And what you basically see instead of unemployment now is labor shortages because of COVID and because of the inflation. So they didn't act a moment too soon, really. They raised the minimum wage. But the thing is, let's say you raise the minimum wage to say 30 or 40. That would throw a lot of people out of work, and it would have the exact reverse effect of maximizing the wage bill. It wouldn't. You could say, well, if you raise the minimum wage, the loss in unemployment from unemployment is less than the gain from the higher wage, so the total wage bill is maximized. But no one really knows the point at which that effect is reversed, and the end result is going to be unemployment, and it always is. I mean, one effect of the minimum wage is probably that the companies have become less open to uneducated people. That, in other words, before the 1950s, you could start out in the mailroom or in a factory in a company and work your way up. That has been eliminated. That when you start in a job, you've got to have a college degree and you start as a professional if you're going to move up into the higher level jobs. And that shift coincided with a lot of the employment regulation, including the minimum wage, that was put forward since the 1930s. So anyway, I'm talking a lot about the relationship between HR and diversity, and HR has played an important role in diversity uh, from the Civil Rights Act time until now. At first, it was primarily compliance. You might call that equal opportunity. Now, a lot of places emphasize diversity to a greater degree, and HR plays a bigger role in that. Now, if you look at what HR does, uh, uh, if you look at what HR does, Dave Ulrich was or is, I think he's still teaching, professor at Michigan, University of Michigan, and he's done a lot of important work in HR. And one of the things that he wrote about is a book called Human Resource Champions that came out in the 90s, I think. And he says in that book that HR has four roles, and I'll put them on the whiteboard. That HR is, first of all, a strategic partner. Second of all, it's an advocate for employees. Third of all, it's a change agent. And fourth of all, it's an administrative expert. Okay. And if you look at these, I think some of these are more realistic than others. And what he says in the book is that the last one, the administrative expert, was becoming less important. And the idea that they're strategic partners, change agents, was becoming more important. And presumably they were always to some degree an employee advocate. Now, I think there's a lot of reason to question how much of an employee advocate HR can really be. And I'll put Dave Ulrich's name. If you're interested, it's a good book. He once, when he was editor of the Human Resource Management Journal, he published a paper I wrote, which was probably that's probably the most prestigious journal, #1 journal in HR. I'm sorry, Human Resource Champions. And basically, the employee advocate part is highly debatable, I was saying, because I think the problem with saying HR is an employee advocate is that they aren't independent of top management. And HR is normally a marionette, a puppet of top management. They have to do what top management wants. So, I mean, if you own a company and you hire somebody who depends on their job for their living, and you say to them, okay, I want you to be the employee advocate, it's not really clear what that really means. It could be that they're simply spies who are telling the top management what the employees are thinking. And they say, oh, they want this, they want that. So the management knows what they want, but how can somebody who depends on the top management really advocate that vigorously, that strongly for the employees? So a lot of people who advocate labor unions would dispute the possibility that HR can play the kind of role that Dave Ulrich claims for it. Now, you could say, and this gets back to the stuff I was talking about, um, exit, voice, and loyalty. Remember, we talked about exit versus voice. And this is the idea that, the guy that first talked about this was Albert Hirschman in the book Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. Basically he was really not a labor economist. He was a development economist more than anything, but this was more of a labor. It had a huge effect and on labor, thinking by labor people. And in the 80s, so you're talking about another 15, 20 years, Freeman and Meadow wrote a famous book, What Do Unions Do, about what the effects of unions are. And they based their model on this exit versus voice model. And they argued that unions have a differential, they have a strong effect on what happens to employees. And the use of HR doesn't compensate. They didn't talk about HR at all. They don't mention HR in that book. But clearly, if you don't have a union, HR is going to play a bigger role. In most companies, if they don't have a union, or the union's only a small part of the company, the labor section, the people that manage the labor relations, the unions, will be under HR. That was true in the first two places I worked, in all the places I worked, actually. At J&J, for example, well, actually, yeah, they were both under, I believe, the HR vice president. I believe that to be the case. And but it could be they don't get along that well. The labor people often see the HR people as being more of a soft social science kind of thing, whereas they're dealing with economic issues to a greater degree. I don't think it's true, but I think that's how they think about each other. Whereas the HR people, they don't mind the labor people. I think the labor people often don't like the HR people. I may be wrong about that, but that's what I saw when I worked. I mean, it may be a bias from the companies I worked at, but in any case, what Freeman and Meadow said is that unions do a lot that isn't covered by that isn't covered by HR, and in particular, that when you have a union, you tend to have higher wages. The wages will be 5 to 30% higher in union places than in non-union, and that a larger share of pay will be in benefits. So union places tend to have more more of a pension plan, better health insurance, and higher pay. So they have more pay, but more of the pay is in the form of benefits. Okay, so what's the difference between comp and benefits? Compensation and benefits is that compensation is direct. It goes into your bank account, or it goes into your savings account, whereas benefits is indirect. It goes into your benefit plan. A lot of executives, incidentally, decide not to take their pay. Why would you choose not to take your pay? Because you have enough from your resources or from the stock you've received from the company that you don't need the cash compensation. Or in the case of executives, your pay may be so high that you don't need it to live. So you prefer to defer it. Can employees do that? Yes. That's why they set up 401k plans. Very few do, because if you live in New York City, you have to deal with very high costs. The rent is high and food is high and so on. And so you don't have a lot of discretionary income. But if you work in a place with 401k, and also I should add, the taxes are high in New York. So you have the federal tax, but you also have state and city tax, as well as Social Security tax. Everybody in the country has the federal and Social Security, but not everybody has a 7 or 8% state tax, and I think it's 4% city tax on top. So between the Social Security Social Security is really 14, including Medicare is really like 7.5. So it's 7.5 employee, 7.5 company, but a lot of economists have studied what's called the incidence of the employer portion of the Social Security, and found that it's really the employee who pays the 15%. Well, we won't count that extra 7.5%, but you have 7.5% Social Security, 7% state, it's 14.5, 4% city, that's 18.5, and let's say 10% federal. So like close to a third of your pay is taken out in taxes, and then your rents are maybe half your pay. And so that doesn't really leave much over to live. And so your taxes are really, your costs are really high. And so it's hard to save. It's hard for a lot of New Yorkers to save. And so what I would say is that you should, if your employer has a 401k plan, you should discipline yourself to put in at least 10% into the 401k plan. And the reason is that the 401k plan will enable you to defer taxes. You'll pay them when you take out the money when you're old, but you'll defer the taxes, and you won't pay taxes on it when you get the income. So you'll save that 30% you're paying in federal, Social Security, state, and city tax. You'll defer all those taxes, and so the initial return on the contribution that you make is 30%. You save that 30%. And so you can put it into an investment account, and everybody should be putting money away for retirement. That was a mistake a lot of boomers made. In my other class, we looked up the percentage of people age 65 now who have zero assets, zero savings. And that is around 50%. It's slightly higher for women than for men, but it's about 50%. Men, I think, is 48, and women slightly above 50. And basically, that means that you have to depend on Social Security if you need to retire or if you want to retire. But Social Security, excuse me, but it sucks. It does not give you enough to really retire on. And so you need to make other arrangements. And there's also the issue that Social Security is going to be facing a shortfall in about 2033, I think it is, or 35. It was 35, I think. I read somewhere that COVID made it sooner. And so basically, it's not that far. You're going to be still young when it faces a shortfall. So basically, they're going to probably do a few things. They're going to probably reduce Social Security for people with high incomes or asset levels. So like if you've got $1 million, you'll no longer get Social Security. So if you saved a lot, they'll penalize those people. Second of all, they're probably going to raise the retirement age. So I don't know what they'll do. It could be age 70, 71. If they do that, if they make it 71 or 2, I mean, I know a lot of you guys aren't happy to hear that because many of you are foresightful enough to see down the road you may not want to work until you're 72. But the simple truth is that the average person lived until 66 or 67 in the 1930s, and now they live, the age 20 life expectancy is longer now than it was in the 1930s. I'd have to look up the exact numbers, but basically because of that extension, the liabilities of Social Security are much greater. And one way to cure that is to say, well, we're going to give less time in retirement to people. And then the third thing they could do, which I hope they don't do at all, is raise the retirement contributions for Social Security. I think they're currently about 6.5% or 6%, and they're going to raise those. It's somewhat to improve. I hope they don't do that. So basically, that's what's going to happen. One of those things, and or several of them combined. And so basically, it's even more important for you guys to put money away. And this isn't a class in personal finance, but I would say that you should be putting your money at this point in history into a combination of stocks, some commodities such as gold and silver, and some safer investments such as short-term treasury bonds. And I'm not telling you the allocation, but I think because of inflation, there is a legitimate chance that they're going to keep raising interest rates. If they keep raising interest rates, you will see declines in the stock market. If there are declines in the stock market, then you can take the money you put into short-term investments and put it into the stock market. So, in other words, we're at a time in history where the stock market is historically high. You can see that. I'll show you that in the screen share again, where this is a picture you can see on my screensaver. That's my backyard upstate. You could see this from you can see this here. This was associated with the economic catastrophe in 2008 and 9. And so you can exclude that for most normal situations. This was like right after, this was like in 21, I think right after COVID. It fell last year pretty precipitously because of the raises in interest rates. It's come back a little now. So the S&P 500 is now selling at 24 times earnings. If you look historically, you draw a line across here, it's still higher than most times. This was, when was this point? In the late 1890s. I'm not sure what that was about. I'd have to read some history. But basically, there were a few points where it was higher. One was the late 90s, and I lived through that, the internet bubble of that time and the tech bubble. But there haven't been too many times. If you look at 29, which was right before the the crash, we're actually higher than the S&P 500 ratios of 29. They were high then, but not really that high. And so stocks are at a pretty high level now. And you see a lot of times in the, throughout history that they reached this level, going back quite a few years where they fell from here. Of course, they could also go up from here if there's another bubble. That's why I'm saying you should invest in stocks, because it could well be that we have another super bubble. What causes these bubbles and ups and downs in the market is the government, basically the Fed, which stimulates the economy. And a lot of people think, oh, isn't it great? XYZ is president and the stock market's really high. And that means, Trump said it, Biden said it, they all say it. And it's really nonsense. The stock market going up and down is simply a function of the extent to which the Federal Reserve Bank prints money. If it creates more money, the markets go up. If it creates less money, the markets go down. And anyone who's into the stock market knows this. It's, everyone knows this. The mainstream media, if you watch like the TV news, if you do, I feel sorry for you. I'll say that. But if you watch TV news, they never talk about this. They don't frame it. The average person probably doesn't have a good grasp of it. But basically, all these things, the stock market going up and down, interest rates going up and down, employment rates going up and down, they're all related to each other and to the Fed policy. What drives it all is monetary policy. And the thing that causes the Fed to, you might say, well, why don't they just keep escalating money? And there are academics who claim this modern monetary theory, but basically, if you do that, then you end up with inflation. And that gets us back to HR management, because it becomes really hard to manage industrial relations if you have hyperinflation. And so you have to tighten when inflation starts to take off. And a lot of politicians don't like it because the voters, ridiculously, I mean, it's wrong, but they do. The voters blame the politicians for the tightening. And, unemployment starts going up, and the stock market falls. And, when the markets go up, the president takes credit for it. So when the stock market goes down, the people blame the president. But anyway, if you don't tighten, then you have disruption in the HR field, and that's where you start to have like a lot of strikes and stuff. And to the extent that there are unions, and the union rate has fallen precipitously, and I would say it's directly related. The fall in the union rate is directly related to the aggressive monetary creation that has gone on since really the 1930s. Although there was the last tightening, like we just experienced, that was bigger, was the one that caused the Great Depression. And since then, they've tightened and loosened a tiny bit. In general, they've never tightened. So we've had ongoing stock market booms really since the war, since the 1940s. And basically what that's done is it's made jobs more plentiful than they would have been in a free market economy. However, the other effect of that is that unions have less appeal because people can get good jobs. I think also another effect was more government spending. The government borrows a lot of the money that's created. And so what you've had is more emphasis on higher education. So you have more people going to college than you would have in a free market setting. And a lot of those people don't want to be in unions. They want to get white collar jobs. But the end result of that is that now we have a surplus of college grads, and a big percentage of college grads, even in England, and certainly in the United States, are not finding jobs that are better than, they can get without a college degree. So basically, these government policies often backfire and result in the opposite of what they're originally intended to do. Getting back to unions, I was saying that unions object, the advocates of unions object to Dave Ulrich's claim that unions can function as an employee advocate. And if you look, though, at the rate of unionization, it's gone precipitously down. And the percentage of people in unions now, it's called the union density, is roughly what it was before the Depression of the 1930s. So, in other words, there was an important law passed in the 1930s called the National Labor Relations Act. And the National Labor Relations Act established unionism as federal policy. That it said that workers have the right to join unions and they can't be fired because they want to organize a union. It's in other words, it was a precursor to the Civil Rights Act that I started talking about, but it said instead of not being allowed to fire people on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, and gender, it said that you're not allowed to fire people because of organizing a union. And following that law, there was an explosion in unionization in the 1930s and 40s, and you had the establishment of the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, which formed a lot of the what's called industrial unions in the factories. But the CIO has declined precipitously, in part because a lot of factories have moved overseas, in part because American workers are increasingly white collar, and employers have increasingly fought unions. So you've got a whole host of variables that have worked against the CIO. In reaction, a group of the more radical left-wing unions, such as the Service Employees International Union, have broken off and founded a third group. And incidentally, I should mention that the CIO merged with the older group, the AFL, in the 1950s and formed the AFL-CIO. But a group of dissident, more left-wing unions broke off and formed Change to Win. This would be like the Service Employees International Union. And so I think some of the government employee unions, my union is very left-wing. I don't know if they're in, I don't think they're in Change to Win, but they're probably more extreme than Change to Win. So, but in any case, Change to Win focuses more on legislative aggressive legislation rather than the more bread and butter issues that the AFL-CIO focuses on. Okay, so we're just about out of time, and I've talked about a wide-ranging group of HR issues, and so I got a little bit off the track with the points about saving, but that's extremely important to you guys, and it's related very closely to the issue of 401k plans. So basically, I think you are your own boss in today's world, and you have to pay yourself, and you can't rely, as your grandparents might have, on government or on your employer to pay for your retirement and to pay for your economic security. All right, so that said, we're almost out of time, and I didn't take attendance, so I'm going to do that right now. And just to remind you that I posted your exam, please return it to me as a Word file when you're ready to return it. And the digital Dropbox is in the assignments section of Blackboard. It's due on the 17th of May, which gives you a lot of time. It's 9 days. So try to get it in before that. Please base your answers on the textbook. The information is right out of the textbook. So that's the best way to get the answers. Okay. So have a nice day. When I call your name, please feel free to leave unless you want to talk to me. Syed Abbas, Syed Ahmad, Samima Akhtar. Samima, Alessandro.
No, I'm here.
Hello, Alessandro. David.
Yeah, hi, Professor.
Hi,
Here.
David. Adam.
Hi, Professor. I'm here.
Hey, how you doing? Melissa Calixto. Winston. Winston Chan. Bin Chen.
I'm here.
Hello, Bin. Kai Chen.
Here.
Hello. Jirui Deng.
I'm here.
Hello. Farhan.
Hello, Professor. I'm here.
Hello, Farhan. Brianna.
Yeah.
Hello. Steve Feng.
Here.
Hello. Jonathan Gonzalez.
Here.
Hello. June Grant.
Here.
Hello. Hold it. Something's wrong. Okay. Ming Hao Hu.
Here.
Hello. Ming Hao. Angelica. Jian Lin.
Here.
Hello. Leon.
Here, Professor.
Hello, Leon. Elizabeth.
Here. Good morning.
Hello. Rochelle Mendez.
Here.
Hello, Rochelle. Demi.
Here.
Hi, Demi. Cameron.
I'm here.
Hello.
Hi.
Nicholas.
Here.
Hello, Nicholas.
Hi.
Aquino. Olivier. Jenny. Perfecto.
Here.
Hello, Jenny. Chenille.
Here.
Hello. Anna Siddiqui.
Good morning, Professor.
Good morning. Mwinjin. Turbov.
Here.
Hey, Mwinjin, how you doing? Jaren. Jaren Walls. Yi Wen Wu. Yi Wen. Kristen. Kristen Yip.
Hi, Professor. Have a
Hello.
good one.
Morning. Anita Zhao.
Yeah.
Hello. Okay, I'm gonna call off the people who didn't answer. If you're here, let me know. Syed Abbas. Syed Ahmad. Melissa Calixto. Winston Chan.
Professor, can you hear me?
Is that Winston?
Oh yeah.
Hello, Winston. Angelica. Aquino. Jaren. Yi Wen.
Professor, you hear me? You man.
Yi Wen. Okay, got you, Yi Wen. Have a nice day.
You have a nice day. Bye.
Okay, thank you. You too. Okay, I got Anita. Okay. I got Minhale. Okay, you have any questions or if not, you're free to go. Okay, so everyone's gone. Goodbye. Have a nice day.